So welcome everyone. My name is Margot Gia and I'm the Natural Resources and Energy Planner at Windham Regional Commission. And one of the things that I've been particularly hearing about since I've come on as energy planner is that a lot of people from a lot of different towns ask me about enhanced energy plans. They ask me about the energy chapters in their town plans. What's the difference? What's the advantage of having an enhanced energy plan? Can we just put language in our energy chapter? And so we wanted to have a series of programs that we're going to look at sort of the mechanics of, putting language in town plans or enhanced energy plans that hopefully then will then translate into the public utilities commission.
Public Utility Commission has one singular utility.
Right. The Public Utility Commission to then, be able to look at a town's desires and take that into account when they're reviewing projects. So this is the first of those programs. We're working also on a program that will likely come up in late May or early June. That's going to be with Jim Porter. He is the Director of Public Advocacy of the Vermont Department of Public Service. And he will be bringing a lawyer with him to talk about from their perspective and what are some of the processes that go through when energy siting projects are reviewed and are brought to them. So I will also announce that program as soon as we have the date finalized, and you will hear about that. But tonight, I'm really excited to welcome Annette Smith. And Annette is the Executive Director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment. She has, and she'll probably tell you a little bit about her background, but she has worked with many towns across the state on helping them look at their town plans and put in and put language in town plans that will help towns sort of articulate their goals around energy. And so that's we're going to be looking at sort of the mechanics of writing for town plans, and knowing that every town has a very different viewpoint that they're coming from and desires when it comes to what to put in town plans. So that's more on the town side, and this is just some ideas on how to make that language maybe more effective. So at this point, and I should mention that Annette is going to be sharing her screen and talking and sharing ideas, but she's also welcome to questions happening during her presentation. So if you find that you have a question or want to make a comment, then please feel free to, she won't be able to see all of you. So you're welcome to unmute and jump in with your question, and she can then hear you and respond. If you're not comfortable doing that, I will also be monitoring the chat. And so you can write in the chat and then I'll be able to jump in too. So at this point, I'd like to pass it over to Annette, and thank you, Annette, for coming and joining us.
Thank you very much. I look forward to doing this. I do have a request. Thomas, could you please mute yourself? You're making a lot of noise.
Oh gosh, how embarrassing. I'm sorry.
Okay. So
gosh. Wish you told me sooner. Thank you though.
Okay, thank you. So I live in Danby, which is in the Rutland region, and I served for about a dozen years or more on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. I also served on my town's planning commission for about half a dozen years. And I've been involved in a lot of different issues around the state, including Act 250 and Agency of Natural Resources permits. And for the last decade or more, I've devoted a lot of my work time to cases at the PUC, assisting citizens and participating. And I got my start fighting $1 billion natural gas power plant and pipeline project proposed for Rutland and Bennington counties. So that's just a little bit of a background. I am going to share my screen. I have a presentation, which is, I will say, not the usual PowerPoint presentation. And I can't see you now, so I'm serious. Interrupt me if you want. I'm going to give you a lot of information, but consider this more of a handbook, because I'm going to give this to you afterwards. It has a lot of resources in it. And so don't feel like we're going to see everything on every slide. But the purpose of this is to provide you with the three different sort of types of planning we now have to do. Enhanced energy planning, which is the result of legislation passed in 2016 and has virtually nothing in it that's useful to the Public Utility Commission. And then if you want to make it useful to the Public Utility Commission, that's a whole other segment that you must be writing. And I remember when I was first on the Rutland Regional Planning Commission, Mark Blucher was the executive director, and his father was one of the authors of Act 250. And he was adamantly opposed to using plans for regulatory purposes. And so he had sort of instilled in me the knowledge that town planning really should be also about visioning for your town's future, and don't lose that through this. In my experience with the PUC and specific cases that have gone to the Vermont Supreme Court, it is very clear that the language, if you want to put in something in your plan that's useful to the PUC, that the language that you use, it really doesn't matter whether it's an enhanced energy plan or a regular plan. The incentive to do the enhanced energy plan is that your town plan gets substantial deference instead of due consideration. But we have seen energy chapters of municipal plans upheld that are not enhanced energy plans. So actually having the specific language that the PUC is looking for is in many ways more important than the substantial deference. And although the plans also do address transportation and heating, and those are a requirement to get an enhanced energy plan, there is no role for any of that to play in the PUC process. So it's really the only sort of incentive to do it is substantial deference at the PUC for electricity generating projects. There's also the fact that with Act 250, that requires compliance with the town plan. However, in all cases now, whether it's Act 250 or the PUC, the language to be regulatory has to be very specific, and that's the challenge. So first we'll look at what enhanced energy planning involves to meet the Department of Public Service standards. And every town has a data packet. In the Wyndham region, it's all available at this link will take you to that, and you can go by town to get your data packet. This is what it looks like. You have a spreadsheet that has a variety of different tabs for transportation, heat, home heating. And it's basically what it says, data. And this is current energy consumption. And then you also have one for targets. And then each tab, and this looks daunting, but it isn't really, because all you're really going to be doing is inserting the data into your plan. And then there are also a series of maps. It has surprised me that one of the first things that I have had to address when making presentations like this to towns is that planners object to using the state's data. And so I've discovered that some towns are putting a disclaimer in at the front saying it's important to note these state policies and goals didn't originate with us and are based on projections the state has provided. And similarly, the locations for siting come from state developed mapping. That seems to satisfy the people who have issues with it. Now, I do understand the reason people have issues with it. For instance, I attended a meeting while these standards were being developed and regional planners were learning about it, where there were 3 pilot regional planning commissions. And some of the people from one of the regional planning commissions says, we got this data, but we have real world data. And if we extrapolate it out to 2050, it doesn't match. And the response was, just use the state's data. This is all made up anyway. So for what it's worth, that's what we've got. We've been given data. and you can be comfortable with it or not, but you can put a disclaimer in. So these maps that you get, you have the constraint maps, and we chose Rockingham as a case study. So we're looking at Rockingham specifically, but the information that I'm showing you is available for every town. And then it's possible constraints, then it is known constraints. And so, for instance, this uses the BioFinder to look at things. And then we have solar energy potential, and that's where you really want to look at where your solar energy potential is. These are the solar resources, which is sort of a granular thing, but doesn't look at it, the potential. And then you have wind, and this is a little slow, so I'll just skip there. The Rutland region also got hydro and biomass. I don't see that in your packet, but those are generally not terribly useful. So one of the things that I have found to be incredibly valuable is to take these maps and overlay them on Google Earth.
Annette, we have a question.
Sure.
And the question is this document limited to Windham County, or is it available for Windsor County? If so, where can we find it?
Well, what I'm showing you right now is applicable to any county. It's all the same. So I'll give it to you, and you can give it to whoever you want. Does that answer the question?
Well, I think we can also say that, so the packet will have information that's pertainable to all towns.
That's right. We're using Rockingham as a case study, but it's not specific to Windham County at all.
And then I believe if you go to the Regional Planning Commission in your region, they will have the data packet.
Every regional commission will have your data packet.
Yeah. And someone asked if the data has been updated since 2015. And there has not been a substantial update in data from that time. There has been some, I know regional planning commissions have received some data updates from Efficiency Vermont that we have shared with some of our towns. It's probably a little different in every region, but so there is some updated data, but not across the board like this data packet has.
And I see different data packets in different regions. And the plans come out differently too. Now, if you're not familiar with Google Earth, what I did was I took a screenshot of the solar potential map, and I overlaid it onto the town, and I can turn it on and off. I also did the same thing with the wind map. And the benefit of doing this, and you can turn on terrain, and you can really zero in on the areas where there are identified resources. And I first started doing this in a town that had said in its plan that every site should be every solar resource, it should be a preferred site. And so I started to do this. And in Google Earth, if you click on that, you get a slider to dial back the transparency. And so you can actually see what is under there and whether it's a forested site or whether it's a field. And it's a very useful tool to evaluate these various sites. And it's something that I have found is really necessary to get to the granular level that you're expected to get to with the planning that needs to be done to write it. So for instance, for Rockingham, there's an area in the northern part of town where there's a lot of solar resources identified, or solar potential in one area. And it's the peach color. And if you dial it back, you can see how much of it is actually forested. And in general, we don't want to be cutting forests for solar. You can also see there's a field there. And I'm sure this is the same thing that developers do. And I'll provide you with the solar potential and wind potential files so that you can actually do it yourself. I can write up how to create these files if you'd like. So one of the things that
Annette,
is,
we do
yes.
have a hand raised. Sarah, I think had a question or comment.
No, it's just a follow-up on the original question about whether the document's available for Windsor County. And so you're going to send us a link to a state document and then we look by county. Is that what you were saying?
I'm going to send you this PowerPoint presentation as a PDF file, and everything will be in this file.
But from
Include-
that, how do I find, and the other thing, maybe it's a moot point, if they're only up to date to 2015, then what we had in Heartland when we wrote the enhanced energy plan a couple of years ago came from our regional planning commission, and it was more up to date than 2015. So maybe we do have the information, we did have the information that was available.
If you go to Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Planning Commission's website, you'll find all the data for every single town. They have a very good website and they have all the maps and everything. Okay, does that answer your question?
Okay, I will check that again, but nobody at Two Rivers ever told me specifically to look for that there, but I will do it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I can find it for you if you can't find it.
No, I'll find it. I just need to know to do it. All right, thank you very much.
One of the issues that I've run into with towns that they're struggling with in these enhanced energy plans is, do we need to do a preferred sites map? And it is not required. In one town, Sudbury, they did a preferred sites map, and they did it by literally walking around town and talking to farmers, and they came up with 2 sites. And as soon as they got their plan adopted, developers swooped in and developed those 2 sites. So in a way, a preferred sites map is an invitation to a developer. That's a good thing or a bad thing, depending on what you want. And one of these sites was forested, but the town chose it. It had all the elements that they wanted. They had had a bad experience with the developer coming in, doing a site or 2 that they really didn't want. And so they wanted to get ahead of the curve and do that. And so at one point I heard that there was a law firm in Vermont that represented renewable energy developers that was calling every single town to find out if they had preferred sites maps, so that then they could go and send the companies there. This is the one that I mentioned that I do not recommend. This one actually did come from one of the regional planning commissions. Areas that are considered prime solar potential of this map is considered preferred. And I've since run into another town that has the entire town as a preferred site with a couple of exceptions. I think you want to be a little more careful about that. And the other option for preferred sites for the 151 to 500 kilowatt net metered projects is that they can seek a preferred sites letter from the Select Board, Planning Commission, and Regional Planning Commission. These turn out to be much easier to get and much more challenging. I've been running into real problems with how these have been gotten, and they come early before the project is very well developed. The project changes over time. The application that's filed may not be at all what was presented to the Planning Commission, and that is creating real problems for interveners who have issues with sites that are being chosen. So it's something that the preferred sites for gravel pits, landfills, those things are excellent to drive them to, but these preferred sites letters are very problematic. And I just caution you that there really needs to be a better understanding of, especially these 500 kilowatt net metered projects, that these are exactly the types of projects that really need to be built next to load, and not be getting CPGs, building the project, and then trying to find customers that are 2 counties away. That's, in my perspective, sort of the definition of how to do it wrong. So
Annette,
what I'm,
we
Yes,
had another question in the chat.
Sure.
What is the monetary benefit to developers for using preferred sites?
well, you can look at the PUC's net metering rule, and it will lay out the different categories, and those are for that size. Those are category 3, And there is a monetary benefit if they get a preferred site letter. And it is also that they can't do it unless they have or on a preferred site. So really, the utilities and the PUC thought they were discouraging these 500 kilowatt projects. And because they are being built far from load and not next to customers, and that's adding to the grid. And so by requiring these projects to only be able to move forward if they're on preferred sites, they thought that they were kind of cracking down on them. And that hasn't happened because of these preferred sites letters. So that it's not just a monetary benefit. I mean, it's an entire benefit in that you can't even build the project unless you are on a preferred site that can be done with a letter. So this is what is sort of the minimum that I see that towns do to get an enhanced energy plan, energy compliance approval. They insert the data, they insert the resource maps, they insert the constraint maps, they add some sort of narrative, list the known constraints, list the local constraints, and you get your enhanced energy plan compliance. But that doesn't do anything to be useful to the PUC. So now we're going to dive into what it takes to be useful to the PUC. And this is true regardless of whether it's an enhanced energy plan or a regular plan. The PUC is going to be looking at your land conservation measures and aesthetics, your future land use maps, districts that you have or areas, Rockingham calls them areas, and then specific policies. So this is the relevant statute. And it shows that there is a benefit to doing an enhanced energy plan. So right now, if you don't have an enhanced energy plan, then regarding orderly development of the region, which is your town plan, due consideration will be given to the recommendations of the municipal and regional planning commissions, the recommendations of the municipal legislative bodies, which would be your select board, and the land conservation measures contained in the plan. So there are actually 4 separate elements there. And how the PUC balances those, I can't explain, but I am seeing that if you have the specific language in your town plan regarding aesthetics or land conservation measures, that the PUC will honor that. But you're balancing it with the recommendations of your select board, your planning commission, and your regional planning commission. And it's kind of an interesting balancing act. And we have seen some cases where a select board and the planning commission will take opposite positions over a project. So now we go to what you get if you have an enhanced energy plan. You get substantial deference. All right, substantial, I should say I'm not a lawyer. Substantial deference means that the PUC, if they have to grapple with what's in it, and if they overrule it by using their general good of the state ability, they still have to say why they are not agreeing with it. And so they have to give the rationale for why they're not honoring your plan. But also, it's not just the land conservation measures, it's specific policies. So you can put very specific policies in your plan. Notice there's no specific policies up here that are contained in a duly adopted regional and municipal plan. And so substantial deference means the land conservation measure or specific policy shall be applied in accordance with the terms unless there is a clear and convincing demonstration that other factors affecting the general good of the state outweigh the application of the measure or policy. Terms shall not include consideration of whether the determination of energy compliance should or should not have been affirmative. So the energy compliance is, not, it's a factor, but there is a benefit to doing it. So in order to be a regulatory document in Section 248 and also in Act 250, you have to use enforceable language, mandatory language. That means shall and must. If you do a search for your plans, you'll find should and encourage and discourage. They're not enforceable, they're aspirational, they're meaningless. And the PUC doesn't consider zoning, but I am encountering cases where town plans incorporate portions of their zoning. So that gets a little tricky. Now, here's an example of a clear regulatory policy, and this comes from a very recent environmental court decision. The Supreme Court found that a regional plan specific injunction against residential development on slopes of more than 20% created a clear regulatory policy. But in a town where the town plan stated the development was inappropriate on the steepest slopes, but didn't define steepest, the court held the plan did not create a clear regulatory policy that could be grounds to deny an Act 250 permit. And this would be exactly the same standard used at the PUC. So if you're going to talk about steep slopes, you got to specify what it is. Now, this is the only real guidance that we have from the PUC. And it is from the net metering rule. And it is what constitutes for them a clear written community standard. So your plan should designate specific scenic resources in the area where the project is proposed. Statements of general applicability do not qualify as clear written community standards. For example, the general statement that agricultural fields shall be preserved would not qualify, and that's in a lot of plans, because the statement does not designate specific resources as scenic. The statement, the agricultural fields on the west of Maple Road are scenic resources that must be preserved, would qualify. In addition, specific guidance for project design. For example, the statement only dwellings, forestry, and agriculture are permitted within the Maple Road scenic protection area would be a clear written community standard because it states with specificity what type of development is permitted. The statement, all development in the Maple Road scenic protection area must maintain the rural character of the area, would not be a clear standard because it does not state with specificity what type of development is permitted. Now, this is not easy. This is really a very hard roadmap that they're setting out, but they are clear that it is specific. This is a case that was recently decided, and in the town plan, the interveners cited that the road had scenic resources. The statement applies to the portion of Richfield Road where the project would be located due to the scenic views of Mount Equinox. However, the statement does not provide concrete guidance for development. The town plan does not prohibit development on roads with scenic amenities. It only requires that such development must be carefully evaluated and adverse impacts minimized. This statement is general in nature and does not give the commission sufficient guidance because it does not state with specificity what type of development is permitted or prohibited along Richfield Road. So they determined there was no clear written community standard, even though Richfield Road was identified as a scenic resource. The Vermont Supreme Court issued a decision in September of last year, and there's a link to it that really is sort of the roadmap for what they expect and what they don't expect. And this goes to districts. And I recommend that you read the decision. It involved a case in Bennington that the PUC denied on aesthetics and orderly development or the town plan. And it upheld part of it and it denied part of it. So it went back to the PUC. The pertinent standard relied upon by the PUC in its aesthetics and orderly development analysis is a design standard providing that development cannot be sited on prominently visible locations on hillsides. In contrast to the broad and general language relating to the preservation of the rural character of the project surrounding, this design standard has the kind of specificity that qualifies as a clear written community standard for purposes of aesthetics analysis. But then they denied the language having to do, so that was what was in the town plan, but then they had, it was called the Rural Conservation District. And in that district, they denied that on that part of it, saying it's not a specific clear written standard that can address an adverse undue, can render an adverse undue impact. Now, this was a 3-2 split decision. I actually think that the two dissenters, one of whom was the Chief Justice, got it right, but it's a complicated decision, but this is exactly what's governing what planners now have to address in your plans. So for instance, in Rockingham, you have a future land use map and a proposed land use map and existing land use map. I'm used to seeing future land use maps as being sort of the basic map, but these look pretty much identical to me. So for instance, these are the various, with the color coding there, the various areas or districts that also matter in the plan. So not only do you need to write language about your scenic resources, you need that are specific to roads, and if it's mountains, naming the mountains, but you also need to write a plan that addresses what happens in these various areas or districts. So for instance, Rockingham's town plan, I'm looking now at the conservation and resource area, which is, not sure which color it is, but it's described in the town plan there. So now let's look at the language. Essentially undeveloped areas which are largely wooded. Some of the conservation areas have limited access to improve public roads. This is descriptive language. All right, so what does it say? Should development within conservation areas be proposed, cluster development is the preferred design. There's nothing in either of these definitions that provide anything with specificity to the PUC. So this could be improved to write language that uses the words must or shall to address the what's a steep slope and where you do or do not want to see development up to, there shall be no development on slopes up above 25% or something like that. The types of development that you want to see in these areas. Here you've got cluster development, but it needs to be more specific in terms of design standards and what types of development. Resource areas generally should be used primarily for, okay, so this is all very general language. And some lands are located within zoning districts which allow for small lot sizes. These limited areas may be suitable for small scale development. All right, what type of development do you want to see in there? What type of development do you not want to see in there? So this is the sort of analysis to do on all of your areas or districts that you identify in your town and the types of development that are appropriate. And you keep going back to this sort of guidance from the PUC about the type of language that they find it that is going to provide them with that clear written community standard and this type of language that doesn't work for them. So we want to preserve all the prime ag soils in town is not going to cut it. So for a municipal plan to be useful to the PUC, and note this is about land conservation measures and aesthetics analysis, it must be specific to the site. So you somehow have to have a magic ball or crystal ball and figure out where you want development or where you don't want development. We are seeing developers come in and choose sites that have very poor solar resources and are not anything that anyone would think of. And they're not good solar resources according to the resource maps. So it's pretty hard to figure out where they might come. And so that's one reason that you might want to try and identify places where you want them and to guide that development. And ideally that would be next to load if it's a larger project. It must provide specific guidance for project design. If it's located within a special district or area, specific standards for that district must be applied to specific areas within the district, such as with mountains, name the mountains, or with farm fields or forests, name the roads within the district. Specific districts or areas description must describe guidance on what development is permitted, and broad and general language is not acceptable. So here's some examples, and these are ideas to spur discussion. I'm not saying do this, but these are just some ideas. So name the roads next to scenic, forested, or prime ag soil fields where you do or do not want solar arrays. If you want them to be screened, you can say they must be screened from state or town roads, must be screened from views of neighbors, adjoining lands, not just residential structures, must not produce glare. We've seen glare as a big problem sometimes. I know of half a dozen sites now with big glare problems, not only from roads, but neighboring properties. Solar arrays must not be sited on prime statewide ag soils as shown on the ANR atlas. Now that can be very restrictive in a town. And again, you can cite to the ANR atlas, and I'll show you that in a minute, but you're naming the roads is what really matters. Doing that analysis that I showed you on Google Earth, using those maps and actually evaluating your town. I remember some of the early discussions we had at the Rutland Regional Planning Commission about this, and people were like, well, you're telling us we have to make decisions about people's private properties, and that's really offensive. And so in Sudbury, what they did was they went out and talked to people and got people's permission before they put out a preferred sites map. I'm not saying any of this is easy. Now, a lot of people are increasingly, including the Agency of Natural Resources, upset about cutting forests for solar. And so you can prohibit them in high priority forest blocks as shown on the ANR atlas. You can reference a map that shows specific areas, name roads. If you want to not cut forests for solar, you have to be specific about where. And here's an example, and I'm not going to read this, but this is some language that was put in the Randolph Town Plan. It does mention I-89, state highways, roads, glare. It mentions sizes. It talks about greater than 10 acres on prime ag soils. Nobody knows if this type of language will hold up or not. There is one town plan that has in it that, and it's an enhanced energy plan, that two contiguous solar projects must not, or that exceed 10 acres are strictly prohibited. That hasn't been tested yet. As far as I know, none of these enhanced energy plans have been tested. Here's some suggestions or sort of talking points to try and get discussion going about what do you want to see for specific policies for wind projects. Name the mountains where you do or do not want industrial wind. A clear written community standard for scenic resource protection must be specific to the site. If you don't name, if you just say we don't want them on our mountains, that's not going to do it. You have to name the mountains or the roads they're on or something that identifies what they are, if you want them or not, don't want them. We've found that I've done extensive work on wind. Setbacks are really the best answer to noise problems, and 1 mile per megawatt seems to be a good number. Decibel levels, we know from experience, 35 dBA day and night is an acceptable level. Now the state's standards are, there are no setbacks and the standards are higher than that. Who knows if you were to actually put protective standards in here, whether the PUC would honor them or not, but that's the answer that all the noise experts tell me. If 35 dBA day and night, you won't get complaints. Must not be cited in high priority habitat blocks. You have to name those areas where those are. Must not fragment forests and high priority habitat blocks. So again, these are just ideas. I'm not telling you to put these in your plan. Here are some examples from the Northwest and Regional Planning Commission and Central Vermont on language that they've used. Some are using tower height, some are using total height. Be careful on tower height. Industrial wind turbines can have towers 200 feet tall. So you want to make sure that the height that you're including is specific to whether it's industrial or there is really no such thing as commercial. You can identify what those are. You can define those. This is an example of what Randolph did. And they said with a tower height hub, excluding blades in excess of 125 feet tall, shall be considered. So define what your definition is of commercial and industrial. And then they named the roads and the mountains that shall not be cited. So this is the type of language that you're looking for in being specific about what you want. Now, as long as you're doing this, there are other topics that the PUC looks at. You can put this in your plan. Now, cell towers aren't considered to be energy, but on the other hand, almost all of them that I'm seeing proposed have fossil fuel generators, 15 to 30 kilowatts. Does your town have an ordinance? You can adopt a cell tower ordinance, and I highly recommend that you do. We're seeing a lot of cell towers coming to towns. I'm spending a lot of time these days on cell towers. It's a tough topic. Gas pipelines, you can put setbacks. What's the safe distance? 300 feet. And if you put that in your plan, that might actually be helpful. We're seeing biomass power plants from time to time proposed. Do you have any, do you want to address that? Do you want one? We know Springfield had a fight over one. There was one proposed for Fairhaven, for Pownell. And so you can put language in your plan to address those. Aerobic digesters, not so controversial. Transmission lines, who knows if we haven't seen new transmission lines. All right, so step 3, planning, town's vision for the future. Don't forget about it. What is your vision for the future of your town? And that's important. Now, the rest of this, and then I'm just going to show you some of the other resources that I'm going to show you. The sizes, just so you have some sort of idea of the size of the current types of projects that we're seeing. Also, I wrote a white paper on Vermont's energy policies a few years ago. It's really still quite current. Explains what policies are. You can adopt a solar screening bylaw. And here are samples of some of the towns that have. I recommend that you look at some of them, and they're all over the place in terms of what they put in them. But the PUC is supposed to, let's see, the facility shall comply with the screening requirements unless the commission finds that requiring such compliance would prohibit it. So I think Bennington says that it has to be screened from neighbors and from roads. I don't think any of these have been tested yet. And then we have the setbacks that went into effect. Then I found this list of adopted municipal enhanced energy plans, and there are a lot of them. And I thought, oh, well, that would be cool to go read them all. Well, that was not very smart, but I did go find them all. So here they are. And the links go to them. And if the energy plan is embedded in the energy, in the entire town plan, I put the page number in. This was way more work. This was a crazy thing to do. But here it is now. And it's interesting to read some of them. The first one that I looked at was Weybridge. And it turns out that Weybridge has some pretty good language in it. So community standards for siting and decommissioning energy projects. So they have definitions. They have definitions for solar and wind. They have siting for solar. They have definitions about solar, preferred sites, good sites, poor sites. They name the roads. Then they have similar things for wind, prohibited sites and poor sites. And I believe they name the mountains, and yeah, Snake Mountain and Weybridge Hill. So this is a really good example of one. I also took a look at, I don't remember what town, Jericho. Now, they have some pretty general language. And what I was trying to find is a good plan and a not so good plan. And this is pretty general, nothing very helpful. I mean, the only thing in it that's useful is their language up here on scenic views, but it refers to and encourages people to work together for the views to the mountain manual. Well, I don't know if that's incorporated in their plan. So this is an example of a plan that it has a lot of words in it and is not useful to the PUC. And it may be aspirational, but it's not specific enough. So some of the other resources that I'll show you that I have put the links in here that are useful to identifying and really evaluating your town. There's a really fabulous Vermont interactive mapping viewer. And what I've turned on here are the parcels, and I've turned on LiDAR. And the LiDAR really gives you a good view of the terrain. And that's quite helpful. Some of you may be aware of the ANR Atlas. So on this one, I turned on the layer for habitat blocks. And then there's also the BioFinder, which is different from the ANR Atlas. And you can turn on natural communities, aquatic habitats, wetlands, vernal pools, wildlife crossings, and rare and uncommon species. The rare and uncommon species are general. And it's an excellent tool for sort of understanding the values in your town, the areas that you want to protect or not. So there's physical landscape blocks, connectivity blocks. This is very important for wildlife. In Rockingham, this area seems to be very important for a lot of the sort of planning to look at. Biophysical regions, forest targets, upland shrub, biophysical regions, that's the Connecticut River primarily, forest targets. So this is part of Vermont conservation design, which is has the goal of setting aside 30% of Vermont by 2030. So this part of Rockingham is part of the Vermont conservation design targets. Another thing to look at is the connectivity blocks. Yes, we looked at that, interior forest blocks. So there are different things in the BioFinder than there are in the Atlas, and there are different things in the in this interactive map viewer. But this does get down to the detail of the parcel data so that you can actually look at what, and most of it has people's names on it, who owns parcels that you're zeroing in on as you evaluate what areas you might want to identify in your plan, either for development or to protect against development. Now, Green Mountain Power has a solar map, and there are areas in Rockingham that are open to development, and there are areas that interconnections on these circuits are subject to a tariff fee. Usually that has to do with substation capacity, but there's your substation, the closest one, and you can click on this map and it will show you that it has 88% remaining capacity. So it has a lot of room on it. And if you zoom out, you can see and check, I checked these, both have a lot of room in Springfield. And so as you're trying to figure out where to guide development, that's a very helpful tool. And another thing is the three-phase power. If you're looking for larger size projects, then they all want to be as close to three-phase as possible. So this is another Green Mountain Power map. There's another map Green Mountain Power puts out that maybe somebody can explain to me how to use it. I don't know how to use it, but it's the conductor size for distributed generation siting. And so, for instance, every single conductor is shown here, but I don't know how to use it. It's there, so I thought I'd show it to you. There is also the Vermont Energy Atlas, so you can see what resources are already in your town, how many people have solar and solar hot water. I'm a big fan of solar hot water. We're not doing enough with it. How many people have, the buses, and you have one small wind, and then we have your town plan, which is, I reviewed it. It is not very specific in any way. It's a very general plan. And then there are a lot of really great maps in Rockingham. You've got a wonderful collection of maps, and putting what's in these together with how you want to see your town develop around renewable energy is, I think, very useful. So, for instance, as you get further down, you've got some forestry and wildlife resource maps and historic resources. Historic resources are important to protect, and unless you have specific language in your plan to protect those, they won't get protected. Natural and topographic conditions. There's your future or proposed land use map. You have more maps than a lot of towns, publicly owned or leased land. In those BioFinder A&R Atlas and interactive map viewer, you can turn on layers for every parcel that's in current use, every parcel that is in that is conserved, all of those are mapped now. It's really quite impressive what the state has done with its maps. So you've got, okay, scenic and recreational resources. Now this map is very important. So you do have scenic areas identified, and you would want to write language, if it's not in your plan, to discuss these areas. And what else do we have? Oh, that's Bennington Solar Screening Ordinance, just to show you an example. They don't have to be long. Woodstocks is really long. Shall be screened in accordance with these requirements, shall be cited and screened so visual impacts are mitigated as viewed from public streets, thoroughfares, scenic viewpoints. Nobody's tested any of these. The comprehensive energy plan does have some good language in it to get down to sort of the circuitry level. So I do recommend reading it. And then we get to the VAPTA maps. So at this point, I'm going to stop sharing and we can have a conversation and ask questions, because I've just thrown a lot at you. And I hope you're not dizzy yet, but now's the time to sort of zero in on how to do what is a very challenging thing to do, to make write a plan that is useful. And I encourage you to turn on your cameras and microphones and talk.
Well, I have a question, Annette. You mentioned a lot, you were talking a lot about aesthetics and scenic, but if towns have concerns about, say, let's use prime ag soils, you know, are specific things like that? Yeah, I mean, obviously you'd have to name where they are, right? I think that's something that was very clear in your presentation, is the more specificity, the better. But if, I mean, is the PUC going to be looking at things beyond aesthetics, beyond screening, beyond, you know, scenic things? Okay, so using things like forest blocks, certain forest blocks, or wildlife crossings, or agricultural soils, that's all accounted for.
Right. And in fact, surprisingly, one of the more challenging things to get standing on at the PUC are the environmental issues, because they defer to the Agency of Natural Resources. And the Agency of Natural Resources has been tending to defer to the applicants' experts. And I'm finding that some of these applicants' experts are not doing a good job. So for instance, wetlands or vernal pools, having the appropriate buffer to protect in a forested area if there's going to be a clear cut. Those are things that if your plan addresses some of the environmental issues, you might do a better job of protecting them than if you try to hire an expert and participate as an intervener at the PUC. So as I think I hope to show you with the tools that I am showing you with the maps, I really encourage you to go to those 3 different A&R and interactive maps and just turn on every layer and learn about the resources in your town. And then combining that with these solar and wind resource maps that you overlay onto Google Earth, and really just evaluating the areas that you really want to protect and that are really important. I think that's, you know, those are the tools that you have, and there are a tremendous number of tools. In fact, I think it's overwhelming. But to be as specific as possible about, you know, as you do this evaluation, you may see there's a field that you have, I mean, and you have to be careful about these prime ag soil maps too, because I have cows, and I have a meadow that my cows barely want to go into. It grows wild strawberries and lichens really well. It's incredibly acid, but it doesn't have much pasture, and it's mapped as prime ag soil. And there's another project in Rutland County that was a standard offer project, and it was mapped as prime ag soils. And the regional planning commissioners actually went out and looked at it and determined it was not, it was like mine. So I contacted the folks who put the maps together, And they admitted that there were problems with them. So you have to ground truth some of that. My test is I go to a field, and if I think my cow's going to like it, I think it's a bad solar site. Peter.
After listening to this, we've been trying to work out some of this in our energy committee over Zoom, and it really doesn't work because we're all looking at each other. We're not looking at these maps. So I think we're going to have at least some meetings in a room with a really big screen TV and put the maps up and go look at them and talk about them in person.
And if you see what I just did, I use a browser. And I open you can do it on Zoom. I open every single map in a browser. And if we had more time, I would just click on every single layer and, as a first step, and just start looking at what is our town made up of? Where are the areas that are important? Especially as we are learning a lot more about the value of trees, the value of forests, the need to conserve or protect land for nature. Some of that can be relatively easy now. And then if you use sort of as a guiding factor for solar, build close to load, build next to load, look for everything possible close to where there's big use. Those are going to help guide you towards the solar development.
I find on Zoom, you never know what screen people are looking at. I have a 24-inch external monitor, but some people are using it on their phone.
I know.
And you can't be looking at maps on your phone.
I know. Well, and Rockingham's maps are good, but what you see on the ANR Atlas and Biofinder are really exceptional now. So find a way to get people in the same room to just take it in. And I think it's hard to do as a group too. Sometimes you'll find one planner who really has a head for this stuff, and we'll do a sort of a first cut, and then bring it to people to look at in a way that's a little more focused.
We do have a really good map maker at the Wyndham Regional Commission named Jeff Nugent. That's why we have so many maps. He's just, every time I've asked him to make a map, like for grant proposals, like, oh, okay, day after tomorrow, sure, no problem.
Yeah, Steve Schild at Rutland, he's a wizard. He's knows so much about mapping. Every time he made a presentation, it was so exciting. Jennifer has her hand up. Can't hear you.
Okay, no, I had to unmute myself. I'm the person who said I'm new. I've only been here less than half a year, and I moved from Durham, North Carolina, which is a town of 27,000 people. And the first thing I said when I saw the Guilford town plan was, oh my God, where are the specifics? There's nothing measurable in here. And there is going to be, in my opinion, which could be incorrect because I haven't been here that long, a problem with getting some of the folks that live here comfortable with language being specific. Is there any guidance on going door to door and approaching the people who live in your town, and they're kind of used to things being, for lack of a better term, namby-pamby?
Well, I think that while it's important to engage as many people as possible in development of a plan, ultimately it is the power of the select board. And so you need to talk to the select board members to find out if they are open to it. I worked with one person who wrote all these shells and musts into their town plan draft, and the chair of the select board took them all out. It's really challenging. You have identified a real problem, and that town actually is now dealing with a proposal that's at the PUC that really would have benefited from having all those shells and musts. So, this is hard because people don't want to do this kind of specific regulatory language. And so I guess the way that I would discuss it is to say, do you want your community to have a voice? Do you want to have a say in what goes on in your community? And because the decisions are made at the state level, this is the only voice we have, and they will respect it. That's one thing that I hear from a lot of towns is it doesn't matter what we do, they're going to do it anyway. But we are fortunate that the PUC chair, Tony Roisman, actually does want to honor the towns. And I'm seeing that especially under him compared to the previous chair, there's a whole lot more deference to towns and what they want, but only if they express it. Now, it can be done through these letters of recommendation, you know, and a lot of towns don't even weigh in when they get an application for something. They don't even take the opportunity because there's this belief that there ain't nothing we can do. And that's just not true. There's a real voice that towns have. They can submit their recommendations. They have two voices, the planning commission and the select board, and they have their town plan. It all matters if they want to have a voice in the way their town develops.
I have one more quick question and I'll shut up. It is because I haven't lived here long. Is there anyone at the state level to whom you can send a draft and they'll help you with making the language such that the PUC will be happy?
Well, that's generally the role of the regional planning commissions. In fact, I have had a couple of meetings with the planners at the Department of Public Service. I have said there's absolutely nothing in your criteria for enhanced energy planning that's useful to the PUC. They recognize that. They have received my presentations. We've had a couple of Zoom meetings. They are working on a new set of standards. At the Department of Public Service, the point person is Ann Margolis. And I don't know what they're going to come up with, but they are respecting my input.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So one of the things I wanted to point out that really struck me, Annette, was that one of the plans that you showed, it wasn't all about saying no. It wasn't all about saying we don't want it here, here, and here. They also said, this is our vision for our town. Where do we want it?
Yep.
And I think that's really important in the planning process to be able to say, you know, I think, and this is my personal opinion, but also as an energy planner, that it is important that we are encouraging development of solar projects or wind projects or whatever a community is wanting in their community. Alternative energy, I should say. It's important that, you know, if we're ever going to meet the needs of reducing climate, you know, change and, you know, our consumption of fossil fuels, then we need to be able to say, yes, we're willing to accept. And where is that?
Mhm.
As well as saying, but we don't want it in these spots, you know, how do it? And I think Rockingham did a great job recently. And Peter, I was wondering if you'd be willing to share, because I think what you all did was very encouraging of solar in your community, but also respectful of where you wanted to see it go and you worked with. Can you talk a little bit about?
You're talking about the gravel pit solar
Yeah.
project? Yeah, this was an almost ideal site for solar. It was a former reclaimed gravel pit. It was essentially invisible from anywhere except to air. And I think it took 7 years altogether. It was town-owned land.
Mhm.
So the select board had to sign off on it. I think it took 7 years from start to finish. And the developer who pushed for it for all those years, Ralph Mima from Green Lantern Solar, didn't end up bidding on the project because by the time the select board agreed to take bids, Green Lantern had decided to pull out of Vermont and move to Maine because they had better incentives. They said, yeah, we're pulling up
I
shop.
wondered what happened to them.
Yeah, we're moving to Maine.
Okay.
So the company that bid on it, that won it, was Novus Solar LLC. Alex Bravakis is the lead, and as I think I mentioned earlier, they haven't lined up all their off takers yet, but they do have their certificate of public good, and it's going to be a 500 kilowatt net metered. There's room for more arrays on the site, but there's some rule that you can't have two net metered arrays right next to each other or something.
Single
But
plant rule. Yeah, I know all about it.
yeah, there's
So
some weird
it-
rules out there.
let me give you my take on good solar siting. I think Vermont has done it all wrong. We have a developer-driven process that puts our communities sort of at the tail end of where things go. And what I would like to see is a more collaborative process. I've done collaborative processes with big companies to great effect, including Agrimark and Cabot for their wash water, Omia, and they're a multinational mining corporation. When people come together to work out development proposals, everything changes. You know, when the citizens and the towns have a seat at the table with the company, it's when you get rid of the sort of the fighting and just decide, let's work together and find a good site. That's what I'm hoping that we can do more of. And so, you know, every community has its own personality. Every town is different in terms of having good sites, but I really think that we can do a lot more with parking lots. If you're ever in Rutland, look at the McDonald's on Route 4. Opposite that McDonald's is the Rutland High School Stafford Technical Center. It has a wonderful solar canopy. It's not one of these big clunky wooden things, but it's intended, I think, to also have electric vehicle chargers. And we haven't done enough at all with the built landscape. And the PUC has been working for the last couple of years on an update to the net metering rule. And so I raised the question of solar canopies, and the response was, well, they're more expensive. And the PUC said, well, how much more expensive? Because we don't know anything about your costs. And if you tell us, I think they would create incentives for it. And I don't know if that's happened. I reached out to the ones who installed that one at Rutland High School. But if we could, there's several benefits to it. One is that you get your car covered in the summer and winter. You can put up charging stations there, and you're building it next to where there's electricity use.
Plus it's already impervious surface.
It's already impervious surface. We're not doing enough with the built landscape, and we're not doing enough to actually serve our local communities. What we're doing is we're putting solar somewhere, and then we're saying, okay, now let's go find the customers. Why don't we do it all together as let's serve our local customers? And the idea of microgrids, I think, is very appealing, so that we can actually power a community with a microgrid. I've had several meetings. I've been approached by companies asking to try and figure out how to do it. But it's all the pieces have to be put in place, and the developers are very, for the most part, very sort of, they want to be in charge. Working with communities the way I'm talking about is just not on their radar. And I would hope that something would happen to change that. And I have made these statements at PUC workshops that we really need to redesign the system so that we support community development, community energy that serves our communities. When solar first started to take off, we went around to every single PUC public hearing we could find and just video recorded it. And it was so interesting to hear the same things over and over again. We want solar in our community, but not there, not that size, and what's in it for us? We're not getting the power. So there's this incredible disconnect that I think that we can fill, and doing good planning is a good invitation to developers. You can even put in your plan that you support, or developers must work with our community on sites. Now, will it matter? I don't know, but I really I really like collaborative processes and working with companies. Some of my best successes have been working with businesses. I've asked at least half a dozen wind developers, will you please work with the community? And so that's kind of a goal to aspire to not just think about, oh, we're going to build solar and we're going to meet our needs. No, we're not. If we don't build next to load, we are not going to be able to continue doing this, because the utilities are all saying we don't need more solar. We only need it in the right places, but just building more solar is not having any benefits anymore.
So I want to be conscious of people's time, and it is 7:40. And so I want to officially sort of thank Annette for speaking this evening and providing a tremendous amount of resources and thinking for all of us to think about as we're thinking about our town plans and our regions. If Annette, if you're okay, if people have some more specific questions, might you be willing to stay on for a few more minutes?
Sure. Yeah, and you can reach out to me afterwards, and I will send Margot the presentation and ask her to share it with everyone. And feel free to, if you want help finding your data packet, let me know and I'll find it for you.
So thank you very much, Annette. And thank you all for coming this evening. And again, when we have the information to share as a follow-up, I will be sending out an email to all pre-registered users, and you all are pre-registered because you're here. And I'll also send out some information as soon as we have the next in our series on energy planning ready when that date is set for that program. So thank you all, and I'm going to stop recording now. But then
thank you for doing this, Margot. This is really, it's wonderful to get this kind of opportunity to help planners plan.
And if anyone has any specific questions, you feel free to jump in.